Hi, Keith here with Rebel Civics on Unsafe Space. Today we're going to talk about the numerous secessions outside the U.S., past and present. There are far too many to list worldwide in one show. The shift over the last 2 centuries is away from massive empires towards decentralization. Peaceful national divorce is the trending method today, not war and death and destruction. The number of independent countries today is about 195, depending on how you count. In 1900, there were 59 countries. So 1 century of secession and separations and peaceful national divorces and a few conflicts has nearly tripled the count of countries today. We have guest J.G. Franklin. He's joining us from Brazil. That's a country that was formed by a separation, mostly peaceful. Could be called a secession. JG is an actor and an English conversation teacher and a Washingtonian. He lives and works in Brazil. He's an advocate for the principle of self-governance. His credits include about 100 feature films, short films, commercials, and theater. JG returns to Unsafe Space after participating in the book club episode that we did recently on Tom Wood's new book, National Divorce. That's a great book, by the way. You can download it for free. Or check out the show. We'll put the link in the show notes. So, JG, welcome to Rebel Civics.
Hey, Keith. Thanks for having me back. This is a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you again. And we're going to talk about outside the U.S., which isn't most people when they talk about secession, at least from the perspective of a Floridian, they want to talk about the Civil War and how come you just want 1 million people to die. Looking at the rest of the world is interesting. So it's great to have someone from another place that can talk about this.
Well, yeah, and it's something when you really look into it, as you mentioned, throughout history, this has not been an unusual thing. I mean, the course of human development has included cycles of centralization, decentralization, feudalism into manorialism, and then back, into much more centralized kingdoms and, what have you. So this is not, an abnormal, thing throughout history. And the idea of self-government and self-ownership, right, I don't think is necessarily new. It goes back to Aristotle and, Socrates, and they may not have said the same words, but they talked about similar concepts and things like that. So yeah, it's a very interesting subject and something that I, now living here in Brazil, after living here 11 years, I've got a daughter who has dual citizenship. And I like to joke that she's American twice, right? She's from the United States, but she's also Brazilian, which is an American, country. So
you used the word. I sorry to interrupt, but I forgot to write it down. But you used the Portuguese word.
Yeah, exactly. So exactly here in Brazil, they have estadunidense. Estadunidense literally means United Statesian.
Yeah, and Americans, just like we have the World Series, is just American. It's just U.S. Like we use the word American to mean the United States. So.
Right, which I'm
going to switch.
Yeah, and I consciously switched, almost immediately after coming to Brazil because I didn't know about that either. I was this typical American, United Statesian, arrogant
United States
person.
So you're living you live in Brazil, but you're a Washington citizen or U.S.
Right, yeah, Washingtonian. I was born in Tacoma, Washington, right? So that's my native country. The states are different countries. They've always been separate, independent countries.
Yes.
The United States has never been a unitary country. So I don't know why people think that. Of course, I might have even understood that because of all the propaganda, but that's not the fact.
And Washington is a state that you can say Washingtonian.
Yes.
It is one of the states that has that. I'm a Floridian, so I can say I'm a Floridian. I sometimes say I'm a Florida citizen. But
and I don't know like Utah and Minnesotan, Nebraskan.
They don't have one. I came from New Jersey. My view is, I immigrated, escaped, say, from the Democratic People's Republic of New Jersey. There is no word for New Jerseyan. Like that doesn't exist.
Well,
nobody says that.
I
don't think. I don't know. Nobody says that. Like you live in Brazil, but you still say you're Washingtonian. I wouldn't say I'm New Jerseyan. I don't even know what that would mean principle-wise. So anyway, I get it.
But that speaks to the idea that most people incorrectly assume that their state is part of a unitary country, which is not the same as a union of separate countries.
Yeah, America is not the United States.
No, it was especially after the Civil War, as I'm sure you know, we became we became the United States is. Before then, it was the United States are.
Yeah. So I want to get this out into the world. So the first thing I was going to bring up, and just to start, is this world map. So the question is, like, how many countries are there in the world? So depending on how you count, right now there's somewhere in the 195, 196, 197 range. There's 193 recognized by the UN. Not that I use the UN as
who cares?
to prove anything.
One of the worst organizations on the planet. Jesus Christ.
They don't count Taiwan, which I guess that's okay. It's really part of China, but it's pretty much self-governing, or almost. And they don't count the Vatican, which is a country. They don't count Palestine, which is a lot of people. But anyway, they're somewhere in that range. Also, another count I saw was 197. That counts Kosovo, part of Serbia. And maybe you don't want to count that. But anyway, there's somewhere around 190, 95, 96
and
right now.
I would be happy if there were many more.
Yes. And so the trend that we want to talk about today is this change. So here's the list, 1900. So in 1900, there were 59.
Yeah.
So that's an amazing change, to go from 59 to nearly 200 in just over a century. And that trend, almost all of these, if you look at them, they were peaceful. Even the Russian Empire breakup was pretty much peaceful. There's a lot of countries came out of that. The biggest one in 1900, the British Empire. This wasn't that long ago. My grandfather was born about this time. 24% of the people in the world were under the British Empire. And, this was in 1900, so it was after the U.S. broke away. All the 13 states in the U.S. left. Even so, in 1900, it's still 24% of the population was British. That was pretty much all peaceful separations.
Yes, recognition over time and effort and people wanting to be responsible for themselves. That's the thing that's missing these days. Most people simply don't want to be responsible for themselves. That's literally the truth.
The principle of self-governance has been trending. So it was the opposite the century before that. As you see these unifications and the whole Europe being combined, the German Empire, the Empire of Japan. So just looking through this list, I wasn't going to get into any of them in detail, but it's interesting to see in 1900 the Empire of Japan, Austria-Hungary was all one thing. This is during the unification, right after the unification of Germany. The Dutch Empire, the German Empire, the French Empire, the Kingdom of Italy, the Ottoman Empire, Spanish Empire. But this was after Brazil, so you're going to talk about it. So anyway, this whole list, there's only 59, and now there's almost 200.
But it seems like there's the trend is that, and I think it's inevitable to continue, but what with the pandemic and then what with, everything else, certainly in the last 10, 20 years, the globalist agenda is very big, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily indicate that, I don't know, it's just, I guess when I indicate that people seem not want to be responsible for themselves, it's more that they've become so submissive, it seems. More submissive than I would like.
And this is, so the trend towards combining, if you go back further, I find this interesting. It's also, what was happening. This is Germany, 1948. There's all these, 1648. So in 1648, this is what Europe looked like. Germany in 1648, I have the numbers here. There were a huge number of different city-states and sovereign kingdoms. And so, there's the question, is Germany better? Here's the number. So this is throughout most of the second half of the 17th century. So from this point, the next 50 years or so, Germany was made of 234 countries, 51 free cities, 1,500 independent knightly manors. And by the beginning of the 19th century, All three of those numbers were below 50. And then in 1871 was German unification. So this is a question. I'm not going to play this, but Tom Woods asked this in a 2015 talk he gave called "The Case for Secession." I'll put the link in the website, Unsafe Space website, for the show notes. This is worth listening to for people listening.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't actually heard this one.
It's a great one.
Unless it was an episode that he had on his podcast, because I've heard a lot of his
it's
episodes.
I don't know if it's a podcast. It's on
Mises
Media. It's on the Mises Media.
I definitely want to check that out.
I found it through the Mises Institute.
Right, because of course the book club just discussed his book National Divorce, and of course he's talked about secession. I've quoted him, in a couple of my articles and things like that too. So,
So anyway, he asked this question, which is an awesome question. So, and what I'm bringing up here is this whole idea is bigger, better, which is a common nationalist view in the United States when you talk about a state seceding in the United States, that bigger is better. That's not true. That's not the trend the last 100 years. And the question that Tom asked in this talk, he just said, would the world be better off if German unification in 1871 didn't happen? If Germany was still 234 questions. And so he goes into that a little bit, like Germany was, if that hadn't become one big all-powerful government, I'd ask, and I'll ask you the question, like, this is my question, like, what would have happened in the world in the early 1900s if Hitler was mayor of Linz and Linz was a city-state? I think things would have been different.
Very. Of course.
That's the question.
Exactly. And centralization obviously has a trade-off in a good balance and a bad. Everything is, as we've talked about before, trade-offs, right? So that's what secession throughout human history has shown, right? Is that people want trade-offs. And so if you allow this, human nature, which can also be, of course, the free market, the market economy is humans. It's not, it's actually literally billions and billions of humans' decisions, right? That's that organic, idea. The same with, countries, societies, groups. You're probably going to have a much greater period of peace if you stop overcompensating into over-centralization, which has been happening for, the last, 100 years or so, it seems. So,
and almost all of those changes were peaceful. There's just a few that were not.
Well, exactly. And so, I would argue the centralization has probably been more warlike than, the decentralization. Luckily, in the sense of decentralization throughout history has been good. And I don't know why it can't be even easier and better and more peaceful. It's just a simple recognition of self-ownership and the fact that we can't get along.
Yeah, I'm not, I don't have any statistics I have to think about, but that's an interesting question you raised was the centralization done peacefully? In most cases, it wasn't. Like Lenin and Stalin's centralization was not peaceful. Hitler's certainly wasn't. Like World War I and World War II was an attempt at centralization that almost worked.
Sadly.
One of the peaceful ones, I guess, not to spend time on the U.S., but the U.S.'s original centralization was peaceful in 1776 through 88. But the one in the 1850s sure wasn't. 1 million people were killed on that centralization.
Yes.
So,
exactly.
so
forced, centralization.
So I might say, I have to think this argument through a little more, but you brought it up. It seems to me that the formation of the current version of the United States was at least as violent as Stalin's formation of the Soviet Union.
Sadly.
1 million people died.
Yes.
That's China, Mao Zedong did more deaths than that, but China's the same kind of story. The centralization there, a lot of people died.
The Great Leap Forward.
A lot of people were killed in that. And Lincoln's centralization effort in the 1850s in the U.S. killed 1 million people.
Well, this is a perfect comparison with, think about Star Trek. Is the Borg peaceful?
No.
The Borg are not peaceful. They just literally assimilate, everything. So
the Klingons, they have a very rough relationship with the Romulans. They're sort of okay, but you don't want to start a country with the Romulans. or
No.
an empire.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's just amazing to me that I don't understand why it's so difficult to let people do what they want to do in a peaceful way. I mean, I just don't get it.
The
What
argument,
does it matter?
there's a lot of people, and you get, perfectly normal people who mean well when you talk about a state or a portion leaving, who resist it. Scotland leaving the
Why?
UK, Texas and New Hampshire leaving the United States, parts of Brazil leaving
Exactly.
the empire, current empire of Brazil, as Brazil gets more and more socialist and more empire-like in their government. The question a lot of people bring up, their reaction is, well, no, we need to be big. That's why we're successful. But that's not true.
No, well, and apparently Tom Woods talks about that very question, as you mentioned, right? This idea of bigger is not better. I mean, what does that mean? We're in this together? No, we're not.
The 1871 unification of Germany is an awesome example. That was not a good one. That was not a good one. And you could certainly say that China, Russia are another one. And I'm no longer convinced that the one that, I was told in government schools that happened in the 1850s here was a good thing. In the end, I'm not convinced anymore.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And it, so Brazil, I didn't know very much about Brazil, but you brought this up in book club. So let's talk about Brazil a little, because that's an interesting one. The Brazil history of separation from Portugal.
Right. Which of course, as you kind of hinted to, is a loose interpretation of a secession, in the sense of they've separated. That's what a secession is some sort of separation. And of course, Princess Isabella, I think it was, and Dom Pedro II, the son of Dom Pedro I, allowed them their independence, allowed Brazil to be independent from Portugal. So it sounds like especially based on what Luis Felipe de Orleans Bragança has talked about. I've heard him talk a few times, and he is a descendant of the emperor, Dom Pedro I. And so he's a historian. He's written several books about this. But it was a realization. It was like, the Brazilians people decided, okay, yes, we don't want this anymore. And they felt like, well, it works best for us too if we can maintain, control over the land. It's a mutually beneficial thing, because then Brazilians are more productive. We can, tap more of their resources. And that's what I find interesting about Brazil, not necessarily applicable now because Brazil is so socialist, but certainly as to what it was in the past during the empire. It was very much a collaboration, right? It was mutually beneficial. That's what the Constitution of 1824 was, certainly compared to the current one of 1988. And Luis Felipe de Orleans Bragança, the prince, based this new constitution that he's trying to move forward, the Constituição Libertadora, based on the 1824 Constitution because of the empire. And there was a much better harmony, of course, nothing's perfect, but it was much better than a truly centralized, coercivist, socialist, fascist, whatever, type of arrangement. And so Brazil was quite productive then. So,
you had sent me a couple links. So one, I didn't know about this new constitution movement.
Yeah, it's one I'm trying to promote as well. I'm trying to get more people to know about it, to understand what it means. It's not as radical as I personally want, but it does focus on more state sovereignty and much more decentralized arrangement in the unitary country currently, which is Brazil, because Brazil has never been a non-unitary country, sadly. It needs more federalism, but this constitution certainly promotes a lot more federalism.
It's a more of a dividing, like giving the states in Brazil back to the power that they originally
exactly, like it
says
Brasil soberano, Brasil livre. So it still maintains the country Brazil, which I personally think is a mistake. I think Brazil, what I interpret as Brazil, and then Brasilia, sorry, I'm thinking Portuguese and English, but Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, these two are the same, centralized coercion. But Brasileiridade, which is the culture of Brazil, is already quite separated. The states are quite distinct. Cariocas are very different from Baianos. Paulistas are very, very different from Cariocas. Mineiros, from the state that I live, Minas Gerais, are very different, right? There are different dialects. There are different word usages, different accents, what have you. And so Brazil has always been somewhat divided. And unfortunately, in the last 20, 30, 40 years, maybe, has been much more centralized, which is the problem.
Yeah, and Brazil, like, how many states are there in Brazil?
I want to say 27. I could be right. I think it's like 26 or 27. I forget.
But it's a lot, and it's a huge country.
Oh, it's
enormous country.
It's continental almost. It's a huge country. Yes.
It's a healthy chunk of all of the continent of South America.
Right, and Bahia itself is, I don't know. Well, Minas Gerais, the state I live in, is bigger than France.
Oh, that one state is bigger. So
yeah,
as far as
one state is bigger than France.
As far as this bigger is better question, like the state you live in is bigger than France, so you'd have to argue that France isn't big enough to be its own country.
Yeah, that's crazy. No, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, bigger isn't better. No, I like to use the one answer that, like, how about Hong Kong? Hong Kong's doing pretty well. It's one of the most financially successful place in all Asia.
Yes.
It's tiny, and its only resource is a harbor. Like it has is free trade, and you can form a company. You can form a new company in Hong Kong way easier than the United States.
Yes, I'm sure.
Very easier than Brazil or France.
And look at the Nordic countries; they're tiny too. Sweden's tiny. Switzerland's tiny.
They're fine.
Yeah,
Denmark,
Norway. There's certainly a better arrangement. Because it's more manageable. It's just simply logically more manageable.
Mm-hmm.
The more you centralize, the more unmanageable it becomes, obviously.
One of the comments going on in chat is about armies, like bigger army is better. But that is proven by treaties. Like Hitler wasn't defeated by one country alone. The king was not kicked out of the United States in 1776. It was 13 separate independent sovereign states in a treaty, and their armies are what fought, really. The Continental Army was a collection of the armies of the states in the U.S. So, yeah, the bigger is better isn't true for that either. And in fact, you look at like little Switzerland, like I don't see Kim Jong-un threatening to nuclear bomb Switzerland. Like, why? China, they're not worried about anybody. Like, they're not an empire, right? So the bigger and better, that falls apart when you see how, is NATO better than, is it good that NATO exists? That would have to be part of the argument.
Sorry. Yeah, no. And this is the funny thing. I think it only takes a thought experiment of a few minutes. Not yet. Yes, plug it in there. Sorry, my daughter's helping me plug in my laptop here so I can keep focused on the meeting.
All right, teamwork.
Sorry. Yeah. But no, this idea of I might have lost my thought here.
You were talking about the bigger, decentralization, bigger is better.
Right. But this idea of, again, it's more unmanageable, right? And I don't know. It's just, that's what it was. A thought experiment. If you just take a minute to do a logical thought experiment and follow things to their logical conclusion, this is what most people don't do, right? They don't even take 5 minutes to just objectively say, okay, this is this, all right, and this goes this. And if you really follow it through, it's a cluster. It never works. It never works. It will never work. History proves that, no, it happens because human nature is what it is. Okay. But it's always bad. And then, we recycle, maybe recover, and then bad again. And this is what is amazing to me. Why can't we learn? This doesn't work. And we never do it again. I just don't,
Some people do learn. Maybe only 3% are learning, but 3% is enough to make a difference.
Well, and 3% is enough to have a different country. So.
Yes. We got thanks Richard Petz for the super chat. He pointed out Switzerland is a great example. Like, why is Switzerland peaceful? There's a couple things about Switzerland. One
It
is
minds its own business, for one.
minds its own business. It doesn't invade anybody.
Yes, why?
They're very much free market. Like everyone's heard of the Swiss bank account.
Thanks. Yes.
Like try to get your Swiss bank to report to the IRS, right? Like Switzerland's a good place. Also, as far as there's also some chat about El Vaquero says keep your guns. Like when something happens, like Switzerland, right? They like everybody has a gun, right? Or most people do. They keep a policy where citizens are armed. It would be quite risky to invade Switzerland.
Right. And isn't it also that they have like regular, citizen training?
Militia.
It's a militia. It's a militia. Exactly.
Militia. Switzerland's a militia. As far as I know, they still don't have a standing army. But
what does that tell you?
Most adults are trained and have weapons, and it's not all. I don't know what the percentage, but they're a lot of that has the attitude of the U.S. in the past. Remember what
the historical federalism, right? The historical personal responsibility, right? This is my job, right? For my family, and my city, and my
When the emperor was in World War II, when the emperor was pushing General Yamamoto to invade the west coast of the United States, he pointed out that we'll find a rifle under every blade of grass. You can't do it. He just said no. He's not even going to try. Like Pearl Harbor from the air. We won't get into that setup, but like that was a safer thing to do. But no, he just adamantly refused to attempt a land battle in California. Like he wasn't going to even try because he didn't think it would work. And he probably was right.
Yes.
Today it might work.
Yeah.
California's changed some, but in 1945, California was a completely different place. So Switzerland's got that as an example. So Brazil, the other thing you brought up is that Brazil has this ongoing secession movements, which I didn't even know about.
Yeah, no, unfortunately they're fairly weak, sadly. Of course, the last three southern states, Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Catarina, and Paraná, they did try to secede at one point. São Paulo also tried to secede. I think you have some information about that exactly there. That's when Getúlio Vargas, he came into power in 1930, and then the Paulistanos decided to try to separate. That didn't work, unfortunately. But yes, there have been movements, and there still are. I've been in contact with a couple of Instagram accounts here in Brazil, at least three. Yeah, in fact, three in São Paulo. So there's still the idea, but as I sent you earlier, one of the people that I've spoken with mentions that the mindset is such, the culture. I don't know. I don't want to be so pessimistic, but again, I think I mentioned this before. Brazilians, by and large, are quite submissive.
Yeah, you said they equate Brasilia, the capital, with the existence
culture.
Of Brazil.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I'm Brazilian. Well, okay, yeah. But Brazil, the continent, the geographic continent, and Brasilia are not that.
We see it. Everyone familiar with the United States sees that all the time. You see the nationalists. Yes. People worship what Washington, D.C. does as a religion. They follow the high priests of Dr. Fauci and do whatever the government says, right?
It's a mental illness. It's truly a mental illness.
I prefer to call it a religion. And I don't want to get into I don't want to get into comparing those, but it's a faith. So they worship the state, they worship the government, they worship the state. A lot of people claim to be atheists that aren't actually atheists. Their God is the government, the state.
Right, exactly. So, and Jordan Peterson mentions this. Jordan Peterson has a good little thing on Instagram where he talks about, because I've argued this for quite some time too. The word God is literally just a word. And if you understand what God historically represents, because there have been many gods, the names, right? Osiris and, Egyptian, whatever. Muhammad is the prophet, Allah is the God, okay, whatever. But if you truly understand, and from my point of view, what God is supposed to represent, liberty functions the same.
That your God could be liberty.
Yes.
But that's not, is that faith? I wouldn't use the word faith for that.
Well, okay, yeah, no, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of faith per se, because I'm much more a fan of conscientiously hoping. I don't just faith. Unfortunately, oftentimes is too connected to blind obedience. This is what I don't like about faith personally. So I much prefer the word hope. But my point is liberty. If you truly understand liberty and truly understand the best of God, what liberty actually means, especially if you're truly libertarian, self-ownership, property rights are literally everything, then that is a great God, right? It functions the same. You're not blindly following it like a religious, but I'm saying it's a perfectly good substitute to say, oh, I believe in God. Well, I believe in liberty.
Yeah, that you could say you believe in liberty the way that some other people have faith in God. But my view, the reason I would point out faith, and I'm glad you said that, as not where my belief in liberty comes from, is because I've used my rational mind to sit down over years and decide that liberty is actually the best system to run a society around.
Exactly, but that's what I mean to say, because Thomas Aquinas, Tom Woods taught me this in his Liberty Classroom, a course that I'm taking. But Thomas Aquinas was very good. He was one of the greatest thinkers, the scholastics certainly of his period. But he had his 5 ways, right? These objectively reasonable proofs for the existence of God, right? But he didn't use any religious aspects in them. He was just using his reason. So again, what it represents, I'm not saying the personal practices of whether you bow to the east or say the rosary, I'm not talking about that. But the essence, and Jordan Peterson talks about this, it's the thing that guides you. It's the thing that connects you to your purpose and how you lead your life. That's what God, in whatever religious form you want, represents. Well, liberty fills the same, purpose. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, if you believe it, so you can believe in liberty from a rational, objective reality point of view of analyzing various ways to arrange society and determining that liberty is the best way.
Right. Well,
which is my position.
Exactly. But I would also argue that you could still be quote unquote religious. And if you learn, and I'm still learning, Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways, they make objective rational sense to prove that there is an entity greater than us. You see what I'm saying?
But what is the entity as far as the supreme being? I would need a little bit of prep time, but my recollection, and I have read some St. Thomas Aquinas, he was wrong in a couple ways. What I like about him, he did try to use objective reality and rationality to prove the existence of God. His arguments, however, fail.
Well, okay, yes, I think that you could now with quantum physics and whatever, but I guess what I like most about him is not that his arguments are the end all beat all, but he did use rational thought.
He did use rational thought, and he's interesting to read, and it's been too long for me to go any further, but that sounds like that would be a fun show to do too.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, because I'm still trying to understand them and where they fail, because I don't know exactly where they fail, but yes, I've recently read certain arguments, how it doesn't work out.
I'll have to back up. My recollection is he can be caught if you watch him carefully using the genetic fallacy, using the divine fallacy. It's most of the arguments, and everyone I've ever seen that attempt to prove the existence of a supreme being using the word God to mean somebody that created the heavens and the earth and man, they eventually get to the point where they say, I have no idea how this happened, therefore God exists. That's a summary of the argument.
Okay.
And that's basically the divine fallacy. And that's my version of the fallacy that, God had to have done this because I don't know.
Right. Okay. But then I would say that, does it really matter? Because I guess as far as I've taken it is such that it just makes sense, right? I've talked about this before, right? The 4 most underrated words in the English language. It just makes sense. Okay, I don't need to understand truly, literally always why. I want to as much as I can, right? But it's enough for me to know that I do believe I have a purpose. So I'm a very spiritual person. I wouldn't say I'm religious in a particular orthodox or dogmatic sense, but I'm absolutely a spiritual person. And I know that the entity, I like what the Native American said, right? The Great Spirit. That seems like the best. Okay, whatever. The Great Spirit sent me here for a reason. I have something that I can contribute. Every human being does. But in order to know that, you have to be able to find that blend and that trade-off between reason and whatever, faith or, something is. But reason should always be the temperance.
Yeah. Yes.
Aristotle talked about this, right? You can have your emotions, you can have your desires, and that's all great. We're human. We all have these things. But reason should also be like, well, what's the real good of this? But then, of course, you have to define what is good, what is bad. There has to be a binary or hierarchical structure, which means you have to be able to talk about the truth or not the truth.
Somebody in chat asked, would you say that God is the highest imaginable good? God in quotes.
Yes. Thomas Aquinas, I think, maybe, or Tom Woods reference, he said it. Yes. He's basically the idea, as much as we can understand. And again, it's a word to describe the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Allah could be the same thing. Liberty could be the same thing, in my opinion, right? Liberty
Allah
is
does
the highest
mean
good.
Yeah, Allah does mean the same thing.
Yeah, okay, but liberty, in my understanding, means the highest good for myself and for everybody else.
Yeah, so liberty and God, that's interesting.
Right.
And from an English point of view, and just remind the listeners, we're talking to an English teacher here.
Yes.
An actor and an English teacher.
Yeah.
But they're related fields, right?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Teachers are actors. Yeah, good teachers are probably could make, technically anybody can be an actor. I mean, it's whether that's subjective, whether they're good or bad or whatever.
Yes. Being good or bad is a separate question.
Well, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm also technically a model. I don't look like a model, but I've done voiceover, I've done acting, I've done modeling. Yes.
Mm-hmm. But to use the words certainly in script writing, acting, the words matter. Like, what are the words you're using?
How you
they matter
say
a lot.
Something, right? Sure. The intention, the emotion you put behind it,
Mm-hmm.
the actual structure of the words. Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. I think we talked about this offline before starting the episode. This idea of people misuse the word reason. Everybody said, no, I have my reasons. Well, wait a minute. Do you? Because reason is connected to reason, raciocínio in Portuguese, reason. What is your objective line of thought that leads you to this conclusion? If there's reason behind it, okay, now you have reasons. If there's not, you have justifications.
You have a justification. You say, well, if my reason is I feel that this is better.
Yeah. How is that a reason? That's not a reason.
Yeah,
it wasn't reasoned.
So when you say the greatest good, like this, what we still have up here, and it's interesting, New Hampshire, here's the New Hampshire exit secession movement in Portuguese.
Yeah.
For anybody from, there could easily be some people in the New Hampshire exit movement watching. There you are in Portuguese on a website, and they're obviously, I can't read it, but they're using the New Hampshire exit as an example for this movement here in Brazil. So you said there was 3 states in southern Brazil that are at least kicking the tires.
Well, they have in the past. I don't know that they're actively doing that now, but in the past there was Rio Grande do Sul, which is the southernmost state, and then I think the next one after that is Curitiba. No, Curitiba is the city. So it's Rio Grande do Sul, Paraná, and I forget the name of the state. Anyway, I always get them mixed up. But those 3 historically did try to secede.
Oh, they actually tried to.
They actually tried. They failed. But now I'm aware of 3 Instagram profiles of São Paulo who are trying. This is one of them who are trying to promote this idea of secession. So São Paulo seems to be where most of the ones that I found, at least the Instagram movements, if you can call them such.
Is São Paulo a city as well as a state?
Yeah, São Paulo is the capital city of the state São Paulo, just like Rio de Janeiro is the capital of the state of Rio de Janeiro.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know. My Brazil geography is not all that great.
Yeah, well, and I've been learning too. It's interesting because people from São Paulo, I believe, are I want to say Paulistanos, and people from the state of São Paulo, but not from the city, are Paulistas. And then in Rio de Janeiro, the people from the city, the capital, Rio de Janeiro, are Cariocas, and the people from the state are Fluminense.
Okay, another thing you had mentioned. So in this is the new Constitution movement.
Yes.
And you had mentioned some of the people here.
Yeah, if you click on autores right there, then you'll see, of course, the different authors, but one of the primary one, Luis Felipe. So he's the descendant of the emperor. So he's the one in the bottom left corner.
Bottom left.
Yeah. Anyway, so and he's a São Paulo congressman, deputado federal, and I get the thing about this Libertadores.
And this, yeah, go ahead. You were talking about this is a return to the federalism, the original setup of Brazil.
Well, yes, certainly much more than, of course, what exists now. And yes, he based this constitution on the constitution that was, I guess, active in the empire, 1824. And so there were a lot more counterbalances, what they call pesos y contrapesos, right? So weights and counterweights, right? To prevent too much centralization, prevent too much, or too much governmental abuse, because the emperor was still there, he still was living, this type of thing.
So the block centralization of power, usurpation is the word we often use in the United States. Refer to the federal government taking power from the states, that it was never constitutionally granted.
Yeah, basically. And I think in Brazil, that was technically similar. And then, of course, in 1930, specifically in Sao Paulo, but I can't remember exactly the dates, but then the 3 southern states wanted to secede at some point. That failed. Sao Paulo tried in 1932. That failed again. So yeah, there is certainly has been, I don't know how, again, it's not super strong now, sadly, but there certainly has been.
The tradition exists, and
it exists.
It could be revived.
Right, and so now this Libertadora, though, is much less a secession in the sense of truly separation like different countries. It promotes a more middle ground of more state sovereignty. We still have the Brazilian Union, which I think is a complete mistake, but that's just my opinion. But then they would be independent, certainly much more sovereign and independent states. That's what this constitution proposes. So it's a more middle ground.
Yeah, so it's increasing. It's still a decentralization effort. So
yes,
it's not a secession, but it's decentralization.
Well, it's a secession from the 1988 constitution. It's an accession or accession to the Libertadores if it happens.
Okay.
So there is a form of or form of separation.
The primary point to bring up is decentralization. So it's moving away from the federal government having more control and the states getting back the autonomy that they once had.
Right. And they're very much, Second Amendment minded, right? Porta de armas, right? People carrying guns. I don't think they're big on legalizing drugs or decriminalizing drugs. That's still something Brazilians have a butt ton of drugs.
Yeah, I would be surprised. I thought Brazil was, but then I know more about the coastal northern Brazil.
Yeah, but no, there are a lot of drugs. There was a whole crack epidemic in Sao Paulo, I think years ago.
Oh.
No, I mean, it's a whole, it's so ridiculous to try to say, oh, well, we will never legalize, okay, well, then you're just going to have a complete mess.
Never say never. You don't know what you're. that never works out when you say
right. So that's one thing where they're weak. Unfortunately, that's where they're weak. One of the things where they're weak, I think, and the fact that it's not as radical as I hope. But I am trying to actively work with Luis Felipe Helio Beltrão, who is the president of the Mises Institute here, to try to move forward on this at least, but also this in conjunction with goldbacks. Right, I've mentioned that before in the book.
Goldbacks. There's a goldback there.
No. I'm trying to introduce it.
Introduce a goldback. Wow.
Yeah. And I'm trying to get these guys, Libertadora, to understand the goldback is how you sell Libertadora to the common man.
They know what gold is there.
Yeah, the goldbacks, the company could use gold. It would be a great partnership.
I think some of the gold we had here in the 1700s came from Brazil.
I'm sure. Yes.
So Utah could send some goldbacks in. So that's interesting. Is there any other tabs in here you want to touch on?
No, not particularly. Of course, just the different histories, História das Constituições, because Brazil's had like a butt ton of constitutions apparently. And the current one is the 1988 one, which is just socially democratic and horrible. But that's about it.
But for anybody that happens to
you can, of course,
read Portuguese
here. Yeah, exactly. You could read the whole. It's 94 pages. I haven't read the whole thing. I've read parts of it. But I went to a talk about it and listened, and it's certainly a step in the right direction. That's the way I promote it. It's absolutely a step in the right direction. It's not as radical as I want, but got to start somewhere.
So that's good. So let's talk about some of the other ones worldwide. And again, there's so many that it was hard to come up with a list. But I wrote a few down that I was just going to rattle through. We've heard recently Catalonia. So the question is, will Catalonia secede from Spain?
Has that been completely kiboshed, or is it still?
It's squashed from what was happening a year or so ago, but there's still occasionally still see about that. It's hard to tell. The arrangement of Spain currently is not as clean as the United States as far as a state seceding. Like, what is the autonomy of the state? It's not. Spain is not divided up the way the United States is, and apparently not even the way Brazil is. Right?
Yeah, but I guess Brazil's slightly more. I guess
it's better. It's a better separation. My understanding is there's no other thing that's called a single country in Earth that is divided as well on paper as the United States, except for the European Union is actually better. But I would put the European Union as one on that. They're really not one country, and we don't talk about it as that. But they're pretty centralized.
No,
they're
exactly.
moving further,
right. That's the problem. They should never be considered one country. I don't think that wasn't probably the intent of the Union. The Union was exactly that: the idea of facilitating certain aspects, not creating a country.
The Union. There are a lot of people, though, who consider Europe. That's the United States of Europe. Basically,
okay,
that's what they want.
That's what they horrible version of the United States of Europe.
That is quite popular view in Brussels, right?
That's horrible. That's horrible.
But it's not to the point where there's no they don't have a Lincoln as the head of the Union that would send bombers to London when Brexit happened. So everybody was pretty happy with Brexit. There's a good example recently of a state leaving a union. That is a secession. It's leaving. It was a peaceful national divorce, leaving a union, and there was a process in Brexit to do that, and it was done by citizens' referendum. They voted to leave. A lot of people were surprised, but they did vote to leave, and they're leaving.
Right, and that is basically the process. I don't understand why it seems to be so complicated, or why people complicate the matter. Now, okay, in the logistics of certain things, I can understand how there might be, we have to sit down and discuss this. That's fine. That's the logistics. That's not the decision to separate. The decision to separate is pretty straightforward and logically imperative, in my opinion. Right? So I don't understand why that's complicated. Yes, of course. Then you need to sit down and arrange, who's going to get the artwork and who's going to get the table, and who's fine. But that's manageable.
And there are other countries. I'll call them countries. Nation states might be a better word, but there's other nation states within the EU that are talking about leaving, and several have threatened. Several have directly threatened. The last one, I don't want to say who it is because I can't remember between two. They may have both tried it, but last year when Brussels was dictating the Northern African and Middle Eastern immigration numbers to a bunch of countries, two of them flat out refused and said, we will leave the Union. We'll leave EU if you force us to do this. And that's the change that happened there, that people, they have the Brexit example. The UK had just voted to secede partially for this reason. London is pretty much is a mess right now, partially because of them going along with the immigration numbers that Brussels decides.
Well, and who caused all those refugees? Interesting.
Yeah, that's a subject we'll talk for half an hour on that, I think. I've never brought it up with you, but I can tell that would be an interesting discussion.
Yes. No, oh my God, this is so frustrating. Jeez.
But with the UK's vote to leave by citizens referendum, and they're actually leaving a union, that secession example is sitting there. So that does wake up the central government. And when a country in the EU says, we ain't doing this and we'll leave the EU if you force this, They just had somebody leave.
Yes.
So I would like to 30 seconds on the U.S. again. I can't help it. If one state leaves the union, that's going to change a lot. If
Yes,
Texas
it's
or
be
New
falling
Hampshire, whichever one
dominoes.
goes
Yes.
first,
Well, and
it might
and
not even.
ex-
Yeah, I wasn't even
what's
going to bring up
what's
the
so
falling dominoes. I was just going to point out
yes.
that puts Washington on notice big time.
Right. And why? What about? Because this is why the roundtable is so important. They're working together. What about working together? Especially if we're including California. California wants to secede for the completely opposite reasons.
Well, some
But
parts of California.
well, yeah,
I'm
there are
going to
three.
do
Yeah,
another
exactly.
show.
There are the three movements. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
there's
like you're
6. I
saying.
found out yesterday
Oh,
there's 6
jeez.
talking to somebody.
6.
So
No,
within, we better not go into that, but there's 6 different active movements, all different
right.
in California,
But
and
now
they're all
what?
fine. I like, okay, all you people talk about what you want to do. The idea is
Yes.
self-governance, and I don't live in California. None of
No,
my
exactly.
business.
But the beauty of it, even if let's say there were only one, let's say there were only one, and it was leftist, which the prominent ones that I'm aware of are definitely leftist. But okay, they're coercivist. I don't like the term left and right. They're coercivist or voluntarist.
That's a good word.
The South is, or sorry, the South. California is definitely coercivist. Okay, so but at least the leader or the leaders seem to recognize that. Well, yeah, okay, we want this and you want this. We're completely opposite. Okay, but that's good. Good. Let's separate. Fine. Perfect. Nobody's stopping. Nobody. Well, lots of people are stopping. Nobody wants to stop that. And I was going to mention when it comes to the government, the way the government reacts proves why secession is necessary.
Yeah, they're trying to hold it all together. Right?
Yes.
And
that
the people that resisted Brexit, like we go back to that one, the people that resisted that, they're trying to expand it. They want to expand central authority. It's along the lines of the World Economic Forum. They would rather the whole earth was one big union.
No, exactly.
And so they got to tell everybody what to do.
Right. And so how can people and again, I'm debating. I'm very much on the fence, not on the fence. I'm very much leaning towards the fact that it's not that people are incapable of understanding this. They don't want to understand this. They're willfully stupid, in my opinion. This is the problem.
Willfully ignorant?
They're not ignorant. No.
Oh, they're not ignorant.
No.
I brought it up because I know you know the difference between those words.
No, exactly. I would argue there's a difference. I am ignorant of millions of things, but I could learn. I could go research. I could learn. I can then know. But if I take that information, or rather, if the information is there and I ignore it, now I'm being stupid.
Now you're being stupid. Okay.
You see, so they're willfully stupid. They're not ignorant.
That's yes.
See, that's the difference.
I get it. That's a good definition.
Right,
all right,
so
I'm gonna blast through a couple more, and I have a few links on some that are interesting.
Yeah.
The 3 Baltic states, I don't have a link on that, but they were a clear, peaceful separation when the Baltic states, like the whole of Eastern Europe, that was part of the Soviet Union, an enormous number of separations happened there, all peaceful. Like, and you would think, well, if the Soviet Union, which is one of the most totalitarian countries, if you want to call it in the world, broke up peacefully. Completely peacefully. That's an interesting example of secession.
Yes.
And within that, there's all kinds of variations. The Baltic states. I found out about 2 others yesterday. Someone was telling me I didn't know about this, but did you know Siberia? There's a movement in Siberia for the Altai Republic that used to be a country. That was taken over by Lenin or Stalin. I don't know the exact history, but that was annexed into the Soviet Union. That used to be a country called the Altai Republic. And
that
there's
me of Hawaii used to be an independent country with a kingdom and a king.
It was a king. Yeah, it was a kingdom of Hawaiians.
Uh-huh.
So there's a ongoing movement which has some teeth behind it in Siberia to separate from Russia and become a separate country. And another one is Ural, URAL, the Ural Republic, which is they were actually very close to becoming a country. And when Boris Yeltsin took over, that was squashed. He managed to squash that, but they were very close to separating at the time. And there's a strong movement going on in Ural right now to become the Ural Republic. They were never an independent country. They were an area that kind of had lines drawn around it, but I didn't know about them. There's 2 secession movements. Another one that I had here was Scotland. If you've been following what's going on there. Yeah. What do you think about Scotland breaking away?
Yes, I think well, I mean, look at Braveheart. They've been trying to do that for, you know, I mean,
500 years, I'll round
yeah,
off something
so,
like a half a
yeah, so, I mean,
century.
this is not, this is nothing new
There's a
historically
bunch of
for them,
movies. I just watched
but this
another
is
one I
new.
hadn't seen before that was, Scottish, a Scottish
Yeah.
independence. But this is something that I had followed. I posted in the
Yeah,
I'm,
it's very
I'm
cool.
admin on the Florida Flexit. It's called Florida Exit page. But we got into this on there that there was a vote in Parliament, 70-54. They reaffirmed the right of Scotland to choose their constitutional future. And I like how this is worded. I'm going to read it. That they say that. This is in the Scotland Act 1988, reaffirms its belief that the people in Scotland have the sovereign right to determine the form of government best suited to their needs, believe that the United Kingdom should be a voluntary association of nations, and it should open to any of its parts to choose by democratic means
Yes.
what to do. That's going on in Scotland. Scotland could be one of the next ones. I wouldn't be surprised in the next couple of years if
Well, and
Scotland is a different country.
and I absolutely hope that they do it. I hope this stuff happens, simultaneously. I'm trying for the same thing here in Brazil.
And I wouldn't expect a war. I don't think they're going to go to war to
No,
keep
but
Scotland.
exactly. But there's another thing. If Texas, New Hampshire, and let's say Florida, I guess, just as examples, and then of course, if I could, convince the three southern states, Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Catarina, that's what it was, Santa Catarina and Paraná, if I could get movement, some traction here, if all of these countries do very similarly in very close, proximity as far as time, then the governments are going to be so spread thin anyway. And again, the way they react is going to prove why it's necessary.
What would happen. All right, here's another one. Just going to bring up my link. Namibia, not too many people follow this one, but Namibia, the country of Namibia used to be the state of Southwest Africa, two separate words. It's a huge state. It was a huge part of South Africa going way back. When Nelson Mandela and the ANC, the African National Congress, took over in the 90s, control of South Africa, and started destroying South Africa. Right at the beginning, the Southwest Africa said we ain't being part of this, and they left. And I just had a note handed to me. South Africa agreed to give up control of Namibia. So it was a separation. There was no war. Somebody from South Africa just handed me a note. I asked her to look it up.
But look at the majority of the things you've mentioned have been peaceful. Exactly. The majority have been peaceful.
Yeah. So, and I was going to bring up a couple that secessions that haven't been peaceful. And my view is it's interesting to think about why they haven't been. So Ukraine, I look at it, Ukraine seceded from the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union broke up, became an independent country. Then Crimea seceded from Ukraine and voted to join Russia, and Russia accepted it. 2014, 15, something like that. I think it was right around when the coup happened in Ukraine. So there's another secession. Then 2 years or so ago, two of the republics, Luhansk and Donetsk, both those Luhansk and Donetsk Republic, both voted to secede from Ukraine and become independent. They petitioned to join Russia, but they were not accepted by Putin. And since 2014, there's been a war going on between Ukraine and those two republics to try to get them back. So there's an example of a secession that actually triggered a war. And it's an interesting one to look at because of the change from 59 countries to 196 today. Almost all of them didn't have a war, but this one's a huge messy. They're trying to start World War III over it.
Yes.
What do you think?
No, it's well, okay. I would argue that it seems to me this is a testimony to the quality of the mindset of most people nowadays. The quality of mindset the principles behind secession, the principles behind self-governance, whatever, have been completely forgotten or indoctrinated out of them. right? So I would say this is a result of that, right? In large part.
That there's a lot of people who don't believe in it. So the people running Ukraine now,
they've been trained to not even consider it.
Yeah. I might even use the word puppet, that you don't need to train a puppet.
Yes.
But so the current president, I mean, after in 2014, when the U.S. State Department handpicked the new president and the CIA orchestrated a coup that overthrew Ukraine, why you see somewhat facetiously, but the best sarcasm is based on reality, that Ukraine is the 51st state, and this is a war between NATO/US and Russia over a regime change in Russia. Really, what's been going on. Within that, there's 3 other secessions: Donetsk, Luhansk, apologies if I'm not pronouncing the Russian names well, and Crimea, all of which are Russian ethnic majority populations, Russian culture. They were never part of the Ukraine. Ukraine itself is a mess. The western part of Ukraine used to be part of Poland. There's a lot of Polish there. So like that line is probably not in the right place. Then you got the middle part that's Ukraine. They speak Ukrainian. There's variations there too, which I don't even know enough to talk about. And the whole eastern side is mostly ethnic Russians. And a lot of these people would just as soon still be part of Russia, culturally and politically.
Which again, this is what secession offers. If you just say, look, this is not working. I don't like you. You don't like me. How can we help each other? Get the frick away from each other.
Yeah, just draw a line. It seems easy. Like the argument, the argument is, and I got this one from Tom Woods too, is like, look, I'm saying it probably more aggressively than good old Tom would say it, but look, all we're talking about is like, you got this line here. Some people live here. There's a line here, and then we want to just take that line. We want to move it over to here.
Right.
Like,
the greater
what is
Idaho.
The big deal?
The Greater Idaho is a perfect example of that. All it is, it's this. Nothing has changed geographically. I mean, as far as like the land, it's not like land suddenly shift from the north of the map to the It's just drawing a freaking arbitrary line. That's all it is.
It's the Greater Idaho. Just for people who don't know, that's a movement where something like 15 counties in eastern Oregon have already voted. Yeah, I think it's 15. Well, there's another one happening now. They just want to move the line over.
Right. So it's Idaho. I don't know what my reference is as far as your camera is, but yes, it's Idaho here. I'll say and then of course it's just the eastern side, which is already connected. All you're doing is drawing a line.
Yeah, it's the same.
It's not like the western. It's not like the western half of Oregon wanted to join Idaho. Okay, that might be a little more tricky, but it's already there. All they want is just. Yeah.
The western half doesn't want to join, right?
Yes, exactly. Well, Washington State, my home state. This is where I got my TV series idea, Liberty, because there is that movement. I don't know how robust it is, but the eastern half of Washington wants to form a new state, the technically 51st state, Liberty, right? But then, of course, this has been going on for like 150 years, because then, of course, there's the version of Idaho, eastern half of Washington, and Oregon. So there have been versions throughout the last 150 plus years.
Right? And moving those lines seems to make sense. So I wasn't going to get into the U.S. part, but since you are actually a Washingtonian, that's interesting to have a Washington citizen here.
Yes, and all it is drawing a line.
It's moving the line.
Think how often the congressional districts are gerrymandered, and that's all it is.
They're just moving a state line. And in this particular movement, as far as peace goes, they're talking about getting permission of the Idaho and Oregon state legislatures and permission of the U.S. Congress. That follows the Constitution.
Right. And again, I don't understand the resistance.
Tax money. I think Seattle and Portland don't want to give up that tax money.
Okay, but then this proves why secession is necessary, because they're corrupt, unjust, they're unreasonable. They're not reasons, they're justifications. They're not reasonable. I mean, they're reasonable in the sense of, yes, you can track A, B, C, D, okay, but they're not good. They're certainly not reasonably good. They're selfish, they're egotistical, they're centralized. These are not good things.
No. I'm going to read a couple questions and statements from chat that are good. Judson Pinson said, either you believe in self-determination or you don't.
Exactly. Exactly. I've written an article about this idea that, look, every human being, I've mentioned this before, but every human being who is alive today, who has ever lived before, and who will live in the future, myself included, everybody here included, is a hypocrite and a coward. Mm-hmm. The difference is I, among many other people, maybe yourself, admit that I'm a hypocrite and a coward. And now it doesn't control me. And so now I can act conscientiously to determine how badly that affects my life and other people's lives. But it's self-awareness, which is part of self-governance, which is part of liberty. Anybody who truly understands liberty understands that this must be true. And so that's how you move forward.
Somebody asked the question, do you think East Germany should secede and become separate again? I don't see them benefit from being smaller. I don't know enough.
I don't live there. I don't know. Yeah, I don't live there. Maybe they. I don't know what their situation is. Maybe they would be benefited. If they think they'd be benefited, that's what matters.
So the first answer is it ain't none of our business.
Yeah, who cares?
Whatever they want to do.
Sure.
I don't actually know how Germany's currently arranged as far as the counties go. Germany is not made up of independent sovereign states, even on paper, the way United States or Brazil is, or the EU. So it's a more difficult question. But Germany is not run by Hitler today. I don't know what would happen, but I'm not convinced that Germans, and I don't know a lot about Germany, but I have been there about 8 times for work. So I have talked to lots of Germans, spent a lot of time there, including being on both sides of the line. Berlin
and what matters is what do they want? That's what matters.
What do they want? There was an awful lot of people when the wall came down who were happy that they could go visit their family, because that was a line by force, brutal force.
Yeah, certainly was not,
if Germany separated today into East and West Germany, I assume it would be peaceful and there would be trade, and it would be very easy to go from one side to the other. Whether they would both stay in the EU, I don't know. Maybe one half would leave.
Exactly. If there was separation, then people could first find out where they belong, which is truly important initially. Once they've settled, because they now don't have to deal with whatever, or as much of it, then they're going to start talking. Oh, but you still have products I need. Oh, and you still have a service I need. That's naturally going to happen. This is when it comes to Brazil. I make this argument because everybody says, oh, because Bahia is one of the poorest countries. The farther north you go, and certainly northeast, is just poverty. Okay, and they're completely socialist. They voted for Lula again. I mean, morons. Anyway, my point is, everybody says, oh, but what would happen to Bahia? Well, I have 2 answers to that. I don't give a shit. And B, if Bahia were truly separate, you think Sao Paulo, Bahia having the largest coastline of Brazil, would not be able to turn that into some, major lucrative, whatever, with Paulistas, with Sao Paulo businessmen wanting to hire or build hotels? You could certainly work something out. Absolutely.
In the end, the first question in response to that, I would say was, well, okay, if they can't support themselves now, why are you holding a gun to my head to make me support them? You going to justify that morally?
Yeah.
And getting it down to the level of a single person of people helps when for people that are not able to mentally abstract up to the level of a million
they can't
people.
Extrapolate.
They can't go. So I'm thinking off the top of my head, but another way to put that is there are 28-year-olds living in the basement with mom and dad because mom and dad feed them and they put a roof, and eventually you got to kick them out. Robins eventually kick the babies out of the nest, right? That's how you have to do it. And maybe that's what has to happen with Bahia.
Look at all, for example, wolf packs, lion prides. The baby males are kicked out. They got to go find their own place. Mm-hmm. This is absolutely natural. Literally.
Thing. There's a comment here I want to address. It says, for East Germany, bigger is much better for them. It was a lot worse as a communist country. They know what it was like to be smaller, and it sucked. First off, they were not smaller. Soviet Union was huge country. So they weren't small. They were smaller after Germany reunified and they left the Soviet Union. Secondly, smaller and bigger is not defined better. We brought up Hong Kong earlier. Hong Kong is tiny, and it's the most successful financial country in Asia. It's the center of the Asian financial world. It's their Wall Street for all of Asia, which is quite a lot of business happens through there.
Yes.
And all they have is a port. Their only resource is a port and liberty. That's their two
but
things.
Again, liberty, that's the most important part, because now they can make the most of whatever they have.
So he says, they know what it was like to be smaller and it sucked, but that's not it. The problem in East Germany was not size. The problem was communist rule and 50, 75 years, whatever it was, of living under communism.
State. Yes, exactly.
With Moscow dictating every little thing, construction of the buildings, and
the very opposite of liberty. That's the point. It's the very opposite of liberty. Hong Kong had, well, I hope they still have. I guess there's been trouble.
Well, Hong Kong is changing. Well,
right, but let's assume,
100-year experiment worked, and that's what China's so scared of, because
exactly,
that worked.
And the primary element of that experiment was liberty. That's the point.
The Chinese Communist Party, CCP, is in a bit of a pickle right now, because they let the Hong Kong experiment run, and it was incredibly successful. Incredibly successful, and everybody knows that. They also did another experiment in China, which is they allowed quite a bit of free market capitalism. They control it. It's still a fascist place. I'm not saying it's capitalist, but it is a lot easier to start a business in China than it is in California. So
that's crazy.
And you can keep more of your money. So amazing. Now you're still under a lot of control. The government still claims and takes a lot of authority, but that experiment has been run in China, and it's been also being amazingly successful. I happen to be talking to you on a device built in China. So that effect is everywhere, and everyone knows that. And the CCP is as I said, they're in a pickle because they just ran these experiments which say we should actually just end the CCP.
Yes.
Because it's obvious what the best way to run society is. But they can't. They ain't doing that. Elites in power, authoritarians will not allow that. They will never
do this. That's the point. And so it has to be, this is when I go back to this idea of willfully stupid.
Willfully stupid.
You have to understand, history has proven this never, we're talking 100%, this crap, I don't care whether it's coercivist in any form, collectivist, fascist, communist, social, it doesn't matter. It's coercivist in any form or any degree. It has failed 100% of the time. Why does anybody bother thinking or believing in it? It doesn't make any sense. That's willful stupidity.
For the sheeple that go along with it, the elites that get the benefit, it's easy to figure out why they do it. Right?
No, exactly. Yeah, but that's never been a mystery.
That's not a mystery, even to the sheeple.
No,
even to the sheeple.
It is. Well, no, it isn't, because they're willfully stupid, which means they choose to be that way.
They choose to be.
If they were choosing to be conscientious, then it would register.
So it's not even an IQ problem. That's what you're saying.
No, it's not.
It's by choice.
Look at all the intellectuals. Supposedly their IQ is really high, and they're the most coercivist.
Their IQ is high, or you can measure it. It's measurably high.
No, exactly. But then they're morons. They're willfully stupid.
They're economic fools. Economic morons would be economically stupid. I would say that.
Economically, historically, frankly, yes.
Yeah, Richard Petz, thanks again. Another super chat. He said temperament plays a large part in the collectivist versus individualist polity. That is actually what we're talking about, that the temperament of the people that are running things. To have an individualist mindset takes a bit of work and personal responsibility and reason.
Actual use of rationality and reason.
Collectivist is, you can look at it as that's, it's a child's view of the world. Mommy and daddy provide everything. And you see when the government encourages it, they get voters, and people vote for that collectivist mindset because they think they're going to get fed.
Exactly. And so this goes into the willful stupidity. This goes into the fact, this is why I argue lying is twice as much work as telling the truth. Mm-hmm. I mean, think about that. I'm lazy. Mm-hmm. I don't want to work that hard. It's just easier to tell the truth. Holy Christ. Who wants to work that hard?
I'm going to bring up another one, which I hadn't even listed. I don't know why I didn't think of this, but because Richard Pett's super chat was in Canadian dollars, I didn't list Quebec. But Quebec has come close a few times in citizen referendums to leaving Canada for good reasons.
Yes.
Well, Quebec might be worse on its own. I'm not actually even going to get into that part.
Well, so maybe it's similar to the possible.
I think now Quebec doesn't want to leave. I think it's less likely now than it was at one time. But I remember
that's a bad sign.
I remember I might have been in high school or 20s, 30s. Like Quebec has gone to referendum to leave. And culturally, Quebec is quite a bit different from the rest of Canada. They don't even speak the same language. It's a lot different. So yeah, I would support Quebec leaving, although my understanding is it's actually less likely now than it was 20 years ago. Another comment, this is an interesting one when you think about centralization, government authority. If Google opens an office in China and the CCP tells Google to conduct espionage against the US government by CCP law, Google has to. I think that's an interesting one. My first response to that is, well, this is a leading question because first you have to explain why the CCP conducting espionage against the U.S. government is something I would be against. I'm not sure we should talk about on YouTube, but that's an interesting question. Why would the CCP be conducting espionage against the U.S. government? Are we trying to get into war with China? Other than that, it's not obvious to me that the CCP watching what the U.S. government is doing and telling me would be a bad thing.
No, exactly.
But Julian Assange did that. I was okay with that.
And I referenced this happened because there was when Dilma Rousseff was the president of Brazil. Of course, before that there was Mensalão, and then there was Petrolão. These corruption scandals and things, and Brazilians were getting angry at the fact that there was of course, Sergio Moro, who's been, I think he's kind of gone the wrong direction recently, but anyway, and he's from Curitiba, he's from the South, I guess, but he was a prominent judge in the sentencing of Lula, in the Lava Jato, these corruption scandals and things. And then there was another guy, Deltran, something, I forget his name exactly, but they were getting flack from a lot of people because, oh my God, supposedly they did something unethical. One government body did something supposedly unethical to cheat on or to inform on another body. And I'm like, wait a minute. These are both government entities. I want them fighting among themselves. By all means, go ahead. Betray each other, inform on each other, because then you'll leave me alone. So go ahead. I don't know why a normal citizen would complain about that.
Yeah, I'll bring up one other thing. It's sort of related to this, but Carter, who started Unsafe Space and hosts some of the shows, asked him about secure apps. So we would chat by WhatsApp, which is owned by Google or Facebook, I forget which, but assume people are listening to all that stuff security wise. So if you want to talk about secession, he suggested using WeChat. For security reasons, they all have the supposed security, but you might as well assume that anything that's headquartered in the U.S., headquartered in a U.S. state, the U.S. government can listen to.
Yes.
If they don't have a backdoor to the algorithm, they can call the company and say, "I need to know what this guy's talking about."
Yes.
WeChat, on the other hand, exact same thing, except it's the Chinese government that is listening in. And if you're talking about, say Florida seceding from the United States, do you think the Chinese government would really care enough to tell the United States government? No. So that's actually the best place. I thought it was an interesting, and he's a security guy. And he did security for a living. That's somebody who did encryption and security for a living.
Well, and it makes sense that, let them, if they're going to, I guess we don't want to say let the governments fight among themselves because look how that happens. But
no, I don't want that either. I just want to end the governments. Then they can't fight. If they don't exist, then they can't fight.
That's exactly a good point. That's another reason why the more decentralization, the better. It just makes sense.
The China versus U.S. conflict. If I want to put my ideal world hat on and solve that problem, well, and I'm not saying necessarily I would advocate this, but how about if the U.S. split up into 50 separate countries and China split up into, I think, in the 30 kind of range? I don't know the names of them all, but certainly Hong Kong, Taiwan, the southern mainland part. I could name a few if I tried, but if they were all split up too, we wouldn't even be talking about any of this. There wouldn't be a problem.
No, exactly. If people could
have this discussion.
If people could find their ideal place, there's much less friction. There's much less frustration. And this is exactly what decentralization allows: a diffusing, a venting, a release. Right. So who wouldn't want to do that? That's what I don't understand. It's going to relieve the pressure.
So I think, and I have more on my list. I don't think we need to go through. If you have one you want to bring up, I'll just mention one other one that's a big one. I think Czechoslovakia. So Czechoslovakia was part of the Soviet Union. It seceded, when the Russian. I was one of the ones that seceded early. It wasn't really at the breakup, right? A bunch of the Eastern European administrative units of the Soviet Union seceded, like as the in the year leading up to the Soviet Union breakup. Like Czechoslovakia left, and Czechoslovakia, as it turns out, it was never really one nation either. That was grabbed by the Soviet Union. The lines in that were formed in, I don't know if it was one of the world wars or something, like where they drew a line, the Allies or whatever, drew a line about several different groups of people who never got along.
Well, and
when Czechoslovakia seceded from the Soviet Union, there was immediately another secession, and Slovakia and the Czech Republic seceded from each other. And now we have the Czech Republic and Slovakia, which is a much better arrangement. Another one happening right now, which I didn't know about, you hear all this goings on in Serbia, that there's an East and West. There might be an East and West Serbia.
Good.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's 196 countries today. Like a decade from now, it might be 225 or something.
And I'm going to do my best to make that happen.
Yeah, maybe you get 3 down there.
Yes,
don't be surprised if New Hampshire and Texas and California
are 3 up there,
or 3 more in the UN.
Yes, I hope. Screw the UN. I don't even want to be part of the UN, but. Anyway.
I would rather they shut down the UN, but
yes, of course.
To use a count, it is common to use the UN count. The UN count's not that far off. It's there. That number is how many. It ends up being how many places send an ambassador or get recognized. But the number of countries that recognize the countries in the UN, I was reading through that list today and I had to stop because it was fascinating. But there's countries that are in that list that are considered UN recognized countries that are only actually recognized by like 100 countries, 100 others, like 100, and you read through the list and it's kind of funny. You could guess. You'll guess who it was if I'm not even going to pop it up, but all these countries that don't want to recognize other countries as countries. And that would probably happen. Who knows? I don't think that would happen with Scotland, but Czechoslovakia is splitting up. There were some people that resisted that. They don't want to consider them to. Taiwan right now, like, do you want to call Taiwan's pretty much financially independent, governs itself, but it is part of China. So do you want to call Taiwan a country or not? Some of the lists include it, some don't. It's a matter of, in some of the lists, does the UN recognize Taiwan as a separate country, or do, what's the map that I had brought up? I'll pop that up again because we could kind of close this out.
I've actually got to head out here soon.
Yep, I have to do something else too. So, and I didn't mean to keep you this long. I appreciate your time.
No.
But this map of 196, 7 odd countries. It's an interesting site, and this is the World Atlas. It's not a UN site; it's the World Atlas, and you can click and go into here. They talk about some of the other places: Kosovo, Taiwan. So I'll bring up one of them, like Kosovo. So Kosovo is only recognized by 97 UN members, but you say 97, that's half. That's getting up there. Palestine is recognized as a country by 138 UN members. So a lot of people don't.
Well, I don't know, but then it goes back to why is the UN the standard for recognizing a country?
Well, they're not using the UN actually.
Okay.
And I use some of the other. They call them partially recognized. So I like this, and I saw about half a dozen different numbers before I realized it. Because I just tried looking naively. I said, "Well, how many countries are in the world?" So I did that on DuckDuckGo, and I saw like 8 different numbers.
But
so
that reminds me. I don't know how many of you guys know, anybody listening. This is related very much to secession because there is a film. Well, it's not a documentary. It's a film, but it's a true story about Rose Island. Have you ever heard about this? Rose Island in Italy. No. An Italian engineer built his own country.
No, I didn't know about this.
Yeah, check out Rose Island. It should still be on Netflix, I believe.
Is that
this is an example of secession.
Is that did he send an ambassador and become a member of the UN?
Actually did. And look at this. I don't want to have a spoiler, but pay attention to the ending.
Rose Island. Okay, let me write that down.
Rose Island, but pay attention to the ending. It's amazing what it actually says.
Okay, so Rose Island is an island formed by one person.
It's destroyed.
Of course.
Destroyed. It was off the coast of Italy. The guy's an Italian engineer. Enzo something. I think his name is Enzo. I don't remember exactly the details. Yeah. But it's a great story. It's a true story. And it's very much related as it's a secessionist story.
Italy didn't want that.
No, exactly. So
here's another, just, as far as the count goes, this is interesting the United States. Now there's another number. So you want to use 196 from the UN. The United States officially recognizes 195. Well, that's interesting. What's the difference? So I thought, well, maybe there's just one, but it's not one. There's several that are different. The United States recognizes Kosovo, but it doesn't recognize Palestine.
And it doesn't recognize secession. Interesting.
It doesn't recognize secession.
Amazing. How hypocritical.
So the I'll bring this up briefly because I was thinking through this as I was getting ready for the show when I listed Ukraine. Oops.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I've actually.
When I listed, you got to go. You have a class. I actually have have to do an interview. Even though I want to have a secession in my condo I think I want my building to secede from this union, but that'd be a different subject. Right. I'm the president of the condos.
Okay.
Worst job I ever had in my life. Anyway, just get your comments. I'll just say briefly, it's interesting that the failure, if you say the failure of secession, so Ukraine's a mess right now. Crimea seceded from Soviet Union, then seceded, then joined Russia, then the Donbass region, 2 republics, they're trying to secede, they're independent, they've been in a war. Ukraine has been bombing them since 2014 to keep them. That's secession. What's opposing that?
What's opposing that? The centralist globalist mindset, if I'm understanding correctly.
The United States government, NATO.
Oh yes, of course, which is the central globalist, cabal.
So a couple of, if you say, well, secession doesn't work, you'll start a war. Like you could say, when you say, well, you think the 3 states in Brazil want to secede.
Version. Yeah, but that's a manipulated.
Do you want to secede?
Well, exactly. But here's the thing. This is something I'm actually trying to do, and I'll have to probably sign off after this. But This idea, I'm trying to get people to do this, to have a poll, at least in Minas Gerais, and say, look, who supports this idea? That's all I want to know. Because there's an area, the nose of the state, called Triângulo Mineiro. And as an example, let's say there was a statewide poll that said, okay, who favors this idea of at least the Constituição Libertadora, which again is not as radical as I want, but at least that, it's this area, this Triangolo Mineiro, that's where everybody's physically located, coincidentally. They're the ones who support it. Okay, well, then that's where we start. Because my big thing is we have to have focused, surgical conversations. Too many people are considered, we have to convince everybody. No, a vast majority of people are willfully stupid. They've already decided. We don't need to talk to them. Okay, we need to find people such as yourself, people like, João and Gabriel, who I'm trying to work with here in Brazil. We need to find specific people. That's what we need to spend our energy on. Stop wasting time with willfully stupid people. They're never going to change their mind.
And you just frustrate yourself.
But it's exactly, but that's where everybody, no. We have to convince them. No, they've already made their decision.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Never mud wrestle with a pig. The pig will win and he enjoys it.
Of course, yes. That's worse.
It doesn't work. So okay, I want to close out. Yeah, you got to go.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, sorry about this.
And
thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
I'll just make one. I had a quote I was going to read at the end because I was going to get into principle, but I think we touched on it over and over. But the principles of the Declaration of Independence, the idea of self-governance, that people can determine their own form of government and can alter or abolish a government that is not meeting their needs. That's behind pretty much all of these movements.
Absolutely.
That principle. And we don't, people don't realize what the Declaration of Independence is, but this is a great quote I heard from Brian McClanahan, a historian. I just saw this recently. We don't teach the real Declaration of Independence. And by we, he's talking about government schools in the United States. We don't teach the real Declaration of Independence. It's not a founding document. It's a defounding document. It's a document of secession.
Absolutely.
That's a great quote. Brian McClanahan, historian.
Yeah, I know. I've watched a few of his talks. I've listened to some of his courses on Liberty Classroom, Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom. He's fantastic, and he's and Kevin Gutzman is another good one.
He's one of the history teachers. So that's another good resource for people interested in this topic. Tom Woods, Brian McClanahan, especially I appreciate as a Floridian, Brian McClanahan's Southern perspective.
Oh, he's great.
Being a citizen of a state that is not a voluntary member of the United States, we were overthrown and annexed.
Yes.
So
War of Northern Aggression.
In the War of Northern Aggression. All right. All right. So I'm going to close that. So thanks a lot for joining. Let you get to your class. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Take care. Always a pleasure. Bye-bye.
This production was made possible through the generous support of our members. To join our community, visit unsafespace.com. Unsafe Space is an online publication for individualists interested in subverting authoritarianism and ushering in the next Enlightenment. For biting analysis and nourishing composition, or to sign up for our weekly news brief, The Abstract, visit unsafespace.com. Thanks for joining us today.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized for distribution on Apple devices. The following co-conspirators are hereby uninvited to Klaus Schwab's Winter Solstice Party. Please be advised that CBS News has paused activity on Unsafe Space while it continues to assess security. Central bank digital currency is a safe and secure way to protect you from Sam Bankman-Fried. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is misinformation. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.